It's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Ms. Rhonda Shaffer. Good morning, Rhonda. Thanks for taking the time again to be with my class. Would you start by telling us about your professional background?
Good morning, Farhad. It's nice to be here with you virtually. I know I've had prior opportunities to come and speak in person to your students, so this is a little bit different considering the environment that we're in, but happy to be here. And just to give you a little bit intro into myself, I'm an accountant by trade. I worked a number of years in the private sector, and prior to joining federal service, I've been in federal service in the DC area for about 15 years now. Before I joined federal service, I did work as, I own my own practice, consulting firm, and had clients all over the globe. And I also did own an Allstate insurance franchise where I sold insurance to individuals and businesses and financial securities. After that, in my consulting business, I'd done a number of jobs as interim CFO for various organizations in a lot of different industries. I also, having that experience, I also took on permanent positions with a variety of companies, predominantly manufacturing, but also within automotive industry and some other areas. I did a small stint as a state auditor, and then coming to federal government, my first position was with the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Coast Guard. I came in to help them achieve their audit opinion. At the time I came to federal service, DHS and DOD were the only two agencies that had not yet achieved an opinion. The Coast Guard was the largest financial line item, keeping DHS from obtaining their opinion. And unlike other federal agencies, DHS has a legislative mandate to maintain a clean audit financial opinion. So that's a little unique for that agency. And I was hired on to help them get the clean audit. And within the two areas that they were struggling with was the actuarial liability. I don't know if your students know, but the United States is very veteran-centric, goes all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, where after the Civil War, he put into law that the federal government would always take care of those that have sacrificed for their nation and take care of the veterans and their dependents. So the actuarial liability ties to that, making sure that the veterans, after they've done their service, that they are maintained and their life and livelihood is maintained through retirement benefits, medical benefits for them and their dependents. The other part of the audit was related to property. And within most federal agencies, between just the standard payroll and employee benefits, property is the other large financial line items that agencies struggle with to maintain, to make sure that they can support that for their audit opinion. So I did a number of years with the Coast Guard, helping them achieve that. I moved on and promoted to the Department of Veterans Affairs, a number of years working at the headquarters level. Had a great opportunity to learn more about the Veterans Health Administration, the Veterans Benefit Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration, the three silos within the Veterans Affairs. The interestingly enough, although all under the VA, each of those silos operate very autonomously. So getting the three administrations to collaborate together because they have an overarching responsibility to meet the overall mission. So at some point within the cycle of the veteran customer that comes through, they're going to be touching one of those areas. But learned a tremendous amount about the healthcare system, our federal healthcare system within the VA. There's also a humanitarian arm to the Veterans Affairs. We kind of saw this within COVID in regards to the Stafford Act and the stand up and of a national emergency declared disaster, and a number of laws were instituted. Well, I was directly responsible with at the VA with whenever there was an emergency to make sure that the funding would be within, whether it was the health or the benefits or the cemetery side, that the funding was available during that national emergency. During my tenure there, we had Hurricane Sandy, and our doctors there in New Jersey making sure that they had the ability to get down to where an area was flooded by hurricanes, but being able to get into the hospital and serve those individuals that were in need. So the humanitarian arm is pretty interesting with how the federal government operates. But the humanitarian doesn't just serve veterans; it also serves anyone that would be in need that would be within that area, any individual. After serving at the VA, I was asked to take a position at the U.S. House of Representatives. They were having issues within their logistics area with tracking and maintaining IT equipment. A lot of people don't realize, we live in a mobile world, and having the ability to take our phones and utilize our phones or our laptops, things like that. The equipment moves around quite a bit, and so the Congress was having difficulty from tracking that equipment from the time that it entered into the House, as it moved around with representatives and their staffers out to district offices, wherever it may have been, to the time of disposal. So I was asked to lead an initiative to set up a new department of asset management. After I did that, and we were successfully able to do that, I was offered another opportunity within the Marine Corps to do some time in Japan as their regional CFO for the whole Indo-Asia Pacific area. A great opportunity to be a part of that. So I relocated to Japan for a number of years, got back to some of my core training in regards to CFO type positions, leveraging my accounting, auditing, things like that. The unique thing about the Marine Corps is that it is the forward deployed arm in the Indo-Asia Pacific for the military. I won't go into a lot of details about the national security strategy for that area, but the Marine Corps is very much a part of stability. And within the Marine Corps, so the member feels they feel empowered to do the mission that's set before them. One of the things dating back to the end of World War II and the change of the military service was that the military service wanted to make sure families could deploy with the military member and keep the family unit intact. So a big part of my job was to make sure that we had programs in place to maintain the quality of life for the forward deployed Marine and their family. And I had an opportunity to work across a number of different countries in the Indo-Asia Pacific area. The funnest was with the going to Korea and helping to set up where we didn't have enough cash available for U.S. Marines coming in and living off of the local economy and trying to help them convert their U.S. dollars to uh, the Korean currency. So I got to help lead that effort. Besides doing all the other great regional CFO things, the other major accomplishment I had there as well was always Congress is always looking for ways to have improvements and efficiencies, and my programs through uh, the National Defense Authorization Act. It was identified as an area to determine if we could have streamlined some of the products and services provided. In my career in financial management, I'm a support function, kind of like your IT, HR, things like that. So one of the things we looked at is potentially creating kind of a shared services type concept where we could consolidate some of those support functions under one umbrella, and whether or not that would create some cost efficiencies and a more effective organization for the Marine Corps. So that was a great opportunity. We identified that, negotiated some of that with the US government the Japanese government. It worked out really well. With the successes I had at the Marine Corps, the Department of Army asked me to take over the quality of life programs at the Pentagon back in the DC area. So I came back to Washington, DC, and spent about 3 years with the Department of Army. I was asked to help lead their quality of life programs. And I did some time after, being successful with that. I moved into Army logistics and helped with a number of areas there until taking on my most current position that I have right now as a Deputy CFO and Chief Budget Officer with the Federal Highway Administration. It's within the Department of Transportation. So that's a lot of information about myself, but I know that fortunately, I've had a great opportunity to work in a number of different areas within the private sector and the public or the federal sector, and have a broad portfolio of experiences that I think after each position that I've taken, I've been able to leverage back into my tool bag and, for whatever I'm assigned, be able to help leverage those experiences and bring it into the current position that I'm in, kind of like what I'm doing right now with the Federal Highway Administration. One of the things, if your students are tapped into, the local news sources or national news sources, one of the big things within the current administration is the green initiatives. And one of the areas we're looking at within the agency is how does the Federal Highway Trust Fund work? How does it best support that? And are there new programs and things that, as the administration stands up, how will some of those green programs need to be set up and structured, funded, things like that. So I intend to leverage some of those prior experiences to help me, put that in place for our agency.
Well, that's an impressive background that you have with many challenging assignments overseas, here in private sector, in the federal government. You also hold a PMP certification. And of course, you have the finance background, and now being the deputy CFO at the Highway Administration. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us why you got your PMP degree and how has it helped you in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I was a CFO before I ever came to federal service and owned my own firm, as I mentioned, chief audit executive, and had a lot of opportunities to lead enterprise wide type efforts. And I found that I didn't know a lot about PMP, but intuitively, I was successful learning to apply different principles to the efforts that I led. Um, and I really didn't connect the work that I was actually doing on the ground with the PMP framework. When I was at the U.S. Coast Guard, I mean, this was front page all the time. You know, DHS, you know, large agency, unable to obtain their audit opinion, and Coast Guard, this considered a small agency, a small component with about $6 billion in appropriations every year outside of their infrastructure and assets. You know, very small agency, only about 45,000 members, um, 11 different statutory missions, doing phenomenal things. I mean, if you think about it, was Coast Guard that led the U.S. response to Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, Deepwater Horizon. And I was fascinated at how such a small agency could manage those major efforts in such an efficient and effective way. And that's where I began to learn about the PMP credential and the PMP framework. And I realized that was absolutely something that I wanted to further embrace. It was intuitive within leading efforts that I was successful. But as I began to learn and understand the PMP framework and I began to apply it more, looking at the models built within the Coast Guard and how they respond to missions and things. Of course, there's a lot more involved with that with the Coast Guard, but just how how the framework and the principles of project management, if you understand that and you continue to leverage that and use that within your projects, how it helps reinforce success. And one of the statistics I learned as I was managing major efforts, and then it was as I was pursuing my Master's of Science in Business Intelligence, which is about managing, designing, and leading information technology, decision support system efforts, and executive level responsibilities. So as I was pursuing that, one of the statistics that really stood out to me is that 10% of every IT project, only 10% ever goes full to implementation. It's ever fully successful and it gets to the objective. And I found that that was really interesting. Only 10%. You think of the millions and millions of dollars that we spend out there on projects. Some of them are billion-dollar projects. And to know that by having that framework and that foundation at the onset, how important that is and how that can further lead to success. That was something that I wanted to, I decided at that point in time in my career that I wanted to embrace that, become a PMP, be an advocate for PMP. And, you know, I haven't strayed from that thought since. And I find a number of the principles, even in areas where I'm not talking the PMP technical language with another project manager, I find that I can use that framework in every aspect of what I do as an executive, whether I'm leading people in HR, whether I'm coming in within federal highway. And one of the first things presented to me was, looking at, I've got a new division. It's called the Innovation Division. And the idea is that as innovative ideas and looking at the infrastructure throughout the United States, as the research and development arm of Federal Highway begins to identify these, new uh, scientific ways of not impeding the traffic so we can continue the flow of traffic, but yet they can look at how structurally sound a bridge is and the science behind that, then it goes over to my organization to help get the funding. And so I was just last week talking with my team and implementing some of those PMP things about just simple things. How are we planning this? How are we working with our stakeholders over in that research arm? And just, in the back of my mind, leveraging some of that PMP framework that I learned. So I find that you can use that credential in every aspect. I mean, you want to buy a house, you have a goal to buy a house, take a look at the PMP framework, and you can find that if you follow each of those phases, specific for your personal finances and going forward and buying a house, my goodness, you've just instituted PMP in a personal way.
Nicely said. So the discipline of project management, you have found that to be applicable in just about everything you do, because it just makes you get things done more effectively and more efficiently, regardless of what it is that you're trying to do.
Yes, it does. And if I could add, matter of fact, just another thing to think about is, so when I was with the Army, the secretary under the Trump administration, there was a major effort to bring in business-minded individuals, leading agencies, large agencies. And the Army is huge. Army has the largest, they're the largest within the Department of Defense. And our secretary at the time later became the Secretary of Defense, a phenomenal business leader, prior military, so understood how the Army operated, but came in with the idea to really reform the Army and to push down this bureaucracy that had been built in Washington, D.C., and push out to the field and the commands at the lowest level. And so a number of efforts I had the opportunity to start to be at the forefront, to see how we were managing it. And I noticed my other directors and colleagues were struggling with how to take this concept, this vision of their particular area that would move on. And using PMP, I was able to be successful. And the secretary came back and said, Rhonda, how did you do that? And I said, well, simple project management type disciplines, leveraging other things within my, the tools in my tool bag. And obviously also having the buy-in of my leadership to move out on these things. I had another individual, the highest ranking civilian in the Army, commend me for my accomplishments and, talk to me frankly about, all my other directors are struggling. And I recommended, I said, they don't know how to manage a project. I mean, they're experts in their field, but they need that to achieve those successes. So in the long story short, she had her training and development arm within the headquarters of the Army develop a whole project management 101 and business case analysis building course. And I was able to help chime in and bring in the project management aspects of it that were important, and huge success across the board. A number of directors mentioned how thankful they were to have that, because a lot of times some of these concepts are intuitive to us, but knowing and having a framework that can help you get through all of the things that you may or may not know or hunches you have, and following that framework in a very systematic way helps get you to success, and then you're meeting the expectations of your leadership. So, anyways, I just wanted to throw that out
Wonderful.
as another example of why I believe PMP is so important. The discipline is important.
Those are great examples. So, in your work in all the initiatives that you have led and you have been involved in, you work with teams, and we all know by working in teams, there are times that conflicts develop. People have different views of how to proceed, and how you deal with that conflict can be an inflection point for the team in terms of either uh, basically fall apart and not becoming dysfunctional, or if they are able to address that, perhaps it can take the team to actually a higher level. Uh, have you had examples and experiences with teams that run into problems?
Oh, every time. And not just one occurrence, multiple occurrences throughout every project. I don't think there's ever been a project that I did not work that there wasn't some sort of conflict that had to be addressed. But that's not that shouldn't overwhelm folks, and that is not something that uh, your staff should be concerned about. I can imagine, or I'm sorry, your students. I can imagine that it can be fairly intimidating to think, oh my goodness, I'm getting this degree and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be the one a part of a project, or I'm going to be leading a project. So the thing that I would say to sum it up, it is most important to build relationships. Always be thinking about building relationships, because at the end of the day, we're human beings and we have that emotional side, the emotional intelligence side. If you're tapping into that and understanding how your behavior might impact another, or how some of the triggers of their behavior and how that might be impacting the project, um, you you can better manage the situation. I'll give you an example of a time where I had that happen at the U.S. Coast Guard. I was just rocking. I mean, doing great things, achieving a lot that the agency was surprised by. When I had come aboard, we were testifying before Congress that it would take us 5 years just to meet one of the audit objectives. And I was able to do that in 2. So I had accelerated that timeline by 3 years. So I had built the confidence of my leadership in that they could give me more responsibilities, lead bigger projects. We had an effort that they said, okay, Rhonda, let's keep this momentum going. One thing that we need is we need to have an experience study from the actuary to help support this actuarial liability, and how much we can project of what we're going to need to pay out in retirement and medical benefits to veterans and their dependents over the next 30, 40 years, so we can go to Congress, because this is an unfunded liability. So they said, and oh, by the way, we need it done within a short period of time. So I've got this major effort. I have next to no resources, and I've got to do it within a short period of time. So I analyzed the situation, and I realized that the fundamental key of our success with this would be getting the subject matter experts on board that dealt with these type of transactions, actuarial type transactions, or really personnel type actions, because it had to relate to, when did the member come up, when did they first come in through an accession into the military service, how long did they serve, how many dependents did they have, ages of dependents, a number of different pieces of data. So I needed experts that understood the transaction, how the transactions flowed through the personnel system, as well as how having that on the ground, working with members, filing the appropriate forms and things that were needed to process those transactions. So they call them service personnel offices throughout the Coast Guard, and they're predominantly all over the United States. So I thought if I could pull in a full of resources of experts that understood that, that's the first thing that would help us in making sure that I didn't have a big train up time for that staff. The other part of it was I'm bringing people from all over the United States together. So I got to find them lodging, I got to set up a workspace for them. And then the accelerated timeline looking at, we're going to centralize this effort. We're going to do it together as a team. And we're going to have to deal with long hours. And so it's going to be a tough effort. So how we handled it in Coast Guard is we put a number of reservists up on active duty orders. I pulled in a number of active duty, a number of civilians, got them on board. And the project in total took us about 8 weeks. But the reason I went in depth about the diversity and how important that was and the flow of information that was coming in and decisions that we're making, at times the environment could get pretty tense. Everybody knew that this was going to be a Herculean effort to get this project done in this 8 weeks time, to get all the information needed to hand over to the actuary so they could perform the experience study. And at one point, tensions were pretty high. And I had a military member that I won't repeat what was said, but a male military member made a racial comment to a superior female military member. And when that happened, it was like the air was sucked out of the room. Everyone was in shock. This younger member had said something that this older female member, in her generation, it was considered very racial. And so I immediately stepped up, realizing, working with the team, this was towards the end of the 8 weeks. So I had had a number of opportunities of working with them, and realized the first thing I needed to do was separate the individuals. And I needed to understand why this young man said what he said. So I first pulled out the senior member and I said, give me a moment, allow me to, research, talk with this individual, find out what it was, why they said this. Went back to the younger individual, said, help me understand why you said this. This is concerning. And the individual looked at me, the young man, and he said, I have no idea. I had no idea this would be considered offensive. And I said, well, it was offensive. And then that it registered with that individual that they had said this to a superior. Their military career could have been dead right there. So they realized, and I brought the two together. I had a conversation with them both. The senior member, recognized the humanity part of it. Although they were offended, they were able to have the discussion and counsel that younger member that this is just something you need to be cognizant of. So that's an example of a conflict that could have went the wrong way. We could have completely lost track and failed. We ended up being successful. We got major awards. All of these individuals were recognized, but it was about that building relationships because we had spent the time. And I knew how important in this tense environment it would be. I tried to find opportunities for my team that we could continue to build our relationships, to try and keep things a little light. So when they got heavy, people could reflect and say, why did this just happen? And if it was something out of character of the individual, they could fall back on how they realized that maybe that was out of character of who that individual was as a person. Sometimes you have to build relationships in cases where you don't know the individual at all and you're just getting thrown into something. You could have conflict from day one. But anyways, I think the most important thing I could pass to your students is always be looking for the opportunities to be building those relationships with those around them. In this world where we're virtual, and it makes things even harder. There's a lot of great sources that talk about the psychological impact of working virtually, and all of us not really having that human connection. Find ways to build relationships, and you will find that when conflict starts to crop up, people are naturally tend to be more apt to be tried to understanding to work their way through, because at the end of the day I believe that most people are they're in it to do the best job that they can and to help the organization meet the objectives and get have the success of the project. So
That's a great way of looking at it, uh, taking the long-term view of the relationship with the person rather than looking at conflict as a quick transaction, win-lose proposition that one try to win whatever the case is. Having that longer view, it's a great advice. That's really nice. Uh, well, I know we have taken a lot of your time, and hopefully you can join us during our synchronous session to have a little bit more dialogue with the students and answer any questions that they may have. Thank you again for taking the time.
sounds good. Thank you, Farhad.